Well, good evening and welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Ad Hoc Property Committee. My name is Dennis Stedman, the committee chair. And we're very, very pleased that you've tuned in tonight to our June 8th meeting. We have a busy agenda with presentations by our consulting team. But as I think is always important, since we're never sure exactly who is tuned in from the public, to give you just a quick introduction as to what the property ad hoc property committee is all about. We are focused on developing a master plan for the Patterson Farm site. It's 234 acres of pristine farm agricultural land containing 15 old farm buildings and homes. It is owned by the township. It's been owned for 25 years, and because it was acquired without a real plan other than leasing the land for farming, the buildings have gone in. Some of the buildings have gone into disrepair, and they are at a crossroads where if something isn't done soon, it will be too late to do anything. We could lose some of these historical buildings. Because of their condition, there's a major expenses potentially involved in the millions of dollars to develop the site and to get it into all the buildings in the usable condition. So those kinds of expenditures are not going to be made unless there's a good use for the building. So this committee was put together and was charged to develop a master plan for the site so that we can look at it holistically and determine what is the best plan for this property in the long run, so that proper decisions can be made in the short run as to the priority of spending and the uses of the buildings. We're not going to spend major money on buildings simply to have them sit idle. So we need to find some uses. We need the community engaged to do this and to do this properly. And so we're very pleased that you tuned in tonight, and we appreciate your time and attention. We, as I said, have a busy schedule. I will call the meeting to order. We have I see 6 of the 7 committee members here, as well as stakeholders and our consultants. So the first item on the agenda, just to get that behind us, approval of the minutes of May 11. Bet, our secretary, could you take it from here?
Certainly. Thank you, Dennis. The minutes of May 11th were distributed to the committee by our wonderful, able Janelle and perhaps even Katie. I'm not quite sure who distributed them, but they were sent out. And if there are any corrections, please let me know. And if not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Motion for approval.
John, second. From Joe. Thank you. And Joe, I have to do a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Bet.
Yep.
Now for the meat of the meeting is a master plan update. We have with us members of the Cellar Dreary project team, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they go. But the lead architect here, Doug Cellar, is prepared to walk us through some of their assessments thus far. So without any further delay, Doug, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you and your team, and then we'll come back for a update from the community outreach subcommittee and do other business and then take public comment. So
all right, Dennis, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. John, the IT guy, I'm going to hit the share screen button. Does that seem right? Doing that now. Wow. Is
I'm seeing
anybody,
it.
is it a full screen image for everybody? It says consultants update.
Yes.
It is, yes, thank
Okay,
you.
great. Good. So happy to be here. Happy to be getting to know you all and this site and these buildings better. As it shows at the bottom, lower left, Simone Collins, our landscape architects planners. We're architects, generalists with a sweet spot or soft spot for preservation and environmentalism, for lack of a better word, and forward planning. Todd Poole will present later this evening, who's a land use economist. I'm going to see what it takes to turn pages here. So I've broken I've broken the presentation tonight into a few parts. The first one is housekeeping. I want to revisit the schedule, the different tasks that we were contracted to do. I have some suggested adjustments to them I wanted to discuss with the board, and a little bit of the timing of the subject matter that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. And there might be a mute problem on some people's screens, but I'll try to keep talking.
Hey, Jim Majewski. Jim
Someone is
Majewski.
talking with their mute button.
It's Jim Majewski.
For him. Well, eventually he'll look at his screen and get back to schedule.
Bar that opens and closes. I don't know how you can do that with the key.
Okay, can you all still see me? My
Yeah.
screen, rather?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes,
So
thank
this
you.
first slide is the foundation that we began on. I'm not going to read all these points, but it was a somewhat traditional planning concept where there would be multiple tasks beginning with evaluating. In the case of this, we thought there'd be a good focus on history, which is task 2, talking about all the aspects of that, then developing a program, which are uses, then recommending putting these programs into buildings, presenting options, discussing them with the stakeholders, coming up with cost estimates for them, then several meetings during all this process, and then a final report. It contemplated 4 public meetings as these tasks went along, and it contemplated a completion in September of this year. I've instead have a suggested schedule and kind of way of working on this project proposal based on what I've learned and as I've gotten to know Lower Makefield Township and this organization and some of the people I've been talking with, and that is to build our presentations and build the discussions around the ad hoc committee meetings, which, as we all know, are typically the second Thursday in the month. We've had a few of these already, as many of you know, and I'm going to go through these because I think there's some discussion. I have 1 or 2 questions, and I want to see if there's a consensus on this suggested change, or at least make sure you have no questions. But essentially, I'm looking at 3 tranches, I would call them, of effort. The first one is still that data gathering, surveying, analysis, interviews, reading history, looking at all the aspects that we're here together to work on. And so we had a kickoff in March on the ad hoc 1, where you met us all. We geared up for interviews of stakeholders, township users, etc. Had that ad hoc meeting number 2, where we shared preliminary results of those interviews, started showing some of the efforts that we were making on the site analysis and some of Todd's early presentations on his observations. Our last meeting, for those that might remember it, we were a little deeper into the economic study. I believe it was that one, Todd, where you had looked at, it was kind of quite early in your process, I believe, but you had looked at arts organizations. You'd started to look at farm heritage or agricultural destination uses, and you looked at some economic uses. I'll let you talk about yourself later, so I'm not going to dwell on that. So tonight we're at ad hoc 4. what I would like to talk about tonight, besides housekeeping things and talking about some of the early observations that we've made, and with the goal of trying to reach some early consensus on how we're going to respond to these observations and if people agree with them and where they disagree. And preliminary concept plan is my last slide on kind of where we're starting to lean. In addition to that, it's give Todd an opportunity to talk with you all about the economic aspects of how this site fits into the world at large. Also tonight to share with you where we are with our analysis. All the buildings have been surveyed and drawn in plan and elevation. The structural report is almost completed. We're really ready for what we're proposing to be later this month, the first in-person public forum, which, you know, even though these are public meetings, they are not the same as giving people an opportunity to meet with the consultants and talk about their point of focus. In the case of this one, we're visualizing a meeting at the community center, perhaps. I think that's where we might be leaning, Dennis, but where Todd, Bill, and I and our teams present briefly where we are, what we've learned, and give the public a chance to talk to us, ask us questions. It's really a Q&A session for the public who can't attend one of these meetings or are uncomfortable in a Zoom call or don't really dig into the Facebook aspects, to talk to us and give us their feedback. That really ends the first tranche. At the end of that, we kind of know the buildings, we know the stakeholders, we think we understand what their public's coming from. We move into the second tranche, which I'm proposing begins with a focused meeting, next month's ad hoc meeting, focusing entirely on the historicity and the preservation aspects of these buildings. We'll understand them. We'll know their physical limits. We'll know their conditions. You all have opinions and know these well and in many ways better than we do. At that meeting would be our preservation consultant, Bob Powers, and our structural engineer, Charlie Timby. And that's a night to try to get into the pros and cons of different methods of doing a National Register nomination process, assuming that's desired, or if confirming it's desired, how we go about it, how it relates to all the aspects. So without dwelling on it tonight, I'd like to focus on that next month. Then it dawns on me, Dennis and others on the this committee, this schedule of 8 ad hoc meetings starting in March is based on us ending in October. I already asked this committee to extend this first tranche 1 month because the gathering of data was a little more intense with the interviews and all than I anticipated. So I'm essentially a month behind where I expected to be, which in master plan lingo isn't too bad. But the question kind of is, you know, once we understand historicity, we understand the buildings, we understand where we want to go, we have Todd's reports in hand, we've read them, we understand what he's saying. Do we need a special focused night only to talk about uses that, you know, your preconceptions, pros and cons of what we're suggesting? That's a question you don't have to answer this second, but it's one I'd like you to chew on. And let me just keep going through this tranche. Then whether that happens or not, or it gets blended into the next meeting, this ad hoc 6 in August, that's when I expect our team to start having options where we're saying this building's capacity, its size, its condition, the uses that might make sense, start to lead for the, you know, the equipment barn at Patterson or the small barn at Satterthwaite to be these uses, and here's why. And then if that's the case, here's what it means for the buildings around it, and here's what that means in terms of, so that's an important night. It'll be as busy and packed as the historic night. So the question is, do we do a more abstract use night then get into physically planned options for you to review. And the reason I'm saying this is after this, where options have been vetted through this committee, then I want to go to the public in an in-person public forum and vet these uses through them. And I think part of it is, and part of the question, is the timing of this. So if tonight we are early June and we're looking at an in-person public forum later June, if ad hoc 6, we have options drawn for people to discuss and almost vote on. It could be at the public forum, you put red dots on the ones you like, possibly. What do you all think about a late August or an early September meeting? And again, I don't need an answer now, but that's kind of where I'm going with this chart. And then the third tranche is we take the feedback from that in-person forum, the discussions here, all the knowledge we gained from here back, and we kind of choose an A scheme. Might be an A scheme with a couple of B primes. Develop them, review them with the ad hoc, present these recommendations as preliminary, get your feedback, revise them. Ad hoc 8 in October is final draft to the supervisors, and in a in-person public forum number 3, late October, early November. If you all don't mind, I'd like to pause here and maybe, Dennis, do you want to have some discussion now on this, or you want me to keep rolling?
No, let's get some reactions to the scheme now.
My only thought is August is vacation time, so, but I
That was
mean,
my fear.
we need to keep moving on this. So I think August is a fine time.
Cutting very close, end of October, November, to not having a successful budget conversation. So I guess it's all gonna matter what we actually have when, but by the end of October, the very beginning of November, the first draft of the budget is being prepared traditionally. And when
Yeah.
this first draft, it has to be public for so many days to be approved. So it's close to the final draft. So
my current schedule here is, if it's the second Thursday, is October 10th or 12th rather, for this to be delivered in hand and presented in public at a supervisor's meeting. So that's tight, but maybe it's not too tight. You might have known where it's leaning from this meeting, perhaps. This meeting on September 14th is with the ad hoc committee to sort of get stakeholders' feedback on, this is the way we want you to lean, please develop it. So I don't think we can tighten the schedule anymore. I feel that's a true statement. And it sounds like we don't need to add a separate meeting in here. I think uses can be thrown in with options.
Right.
I thought the proposal was 3 public meetings and then the presentation to the supervisors. I'm not
Yes.
sure a public forum after the presentation to the supervisors is proper timing.
Yeah, so what I'm actually, you're on to a point there, Fred. So previously there were 4 public meetings. I think in the flow of sort of when the information flows, and sort of Bill Collins's point was typically 3 does it in a master plan. This final meeting is visualized to be at the supervisors. It's at the township building at a supervisors meeting. It's usually a chance for them to ask us as a full body questions, and it's open to the public. So it's not supervisors and then another meeting, if I heard your question right. But I am carving one public meeting out partially. When you think about this schedule, building it around ad hoc meetings, where do we put it in there? I mean, it's like, it's unnecessary to squeeze 2 more meetings in. It's my view.
Yeah,
Especially since these meetings are so, I mean, what I didn't realize when we first proposed 4 meetings is how public of a process it is here in Lower Makefield, you know, which is quite extraordinary.
No, you're right. You're right in that regard. However, we're also expecting the in-person public forums to hopefully attract more people than our these monthly meetings sometimes do.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the attendance of these monthly meetings is growing, and I think that's favorable and positive. But yeah, August is the summer like this is a very difficult time, but at the same time, to the budget point that Suzanne makes, we really can't. It's not like we can afford to take August off and push things back further. So
Dennis?
I'm supportive of this general timeline.
Dennis, might I
Yes.
suggest that the 2 meetings in the third tranche might be 2 weeks apart instead, and push it a little bit that way. So have 2 ad hoc meetings during 1 month. I know it's a crunch, but it might get the information together to the people that need it.
Mhm.
If you all schedule a meeting, I'll attend it. I guess my point on it was, Steve, is here we get public feedback on everything, nothing's, and then here we get public feedback on options that are being in front, which includes use and the attitude towards historicity. So this is a critical point too. Beyond that, you're just presenting the same thing again, only in more refined detail. In other words, we could have 6 options here, public forum, then you get it down to 3 options, public forum, then you go to the supervisors with an A scheme and a B prime. If that's necessary, you know, if you're willing to roll past the budget process, or I don't know, that's why I just did it this way, and I'm asking for guidance.
Yeah, Doug, I don't know about the dates, but I would comment that I think your logic is very sound here. I mean, I think the strategy of our need for transparency and getting a lot of input, I think, will be served by the logic that you're presenting here. I need a little more time to think about the dates and all that, but it does make sense to do it the way you want to do it.
Well, my intent, Ron, for this exhibit tonight was to put it out there. It's in writing. You can see it with the subject matter, almost move on. You all need to chew on it and then advise me. But right now, I am hoping we arrive at a date for our first in-person public forum, and we present at it, we gather that data, and we prepare for the next meeting, which is a critical one on history and preservation. Should I move to the next slide, Dennis, or is there more discussion?
Yeah, I think so. I think the points that are being made, Steve, thank you, and Ron and others. Mid-October is the deadline. That October 12th or thereabouts, presenting a final A scheme and B prime, as you call it, to the supervisors is the goal. And to Steve's point, whether we have to, mark and move on a couple week basis here and there in between some of these sessions, we'll figure that out. But
yeah,
I
if you
think
do that, we'll roll with you, Dennis.
Your deadline is what counts.
Okay. So the next section I'm going to talk about is some observations, and from that, the principles that they're based on, and I'll just keep rolling here. So the guiding principles, the first 3 will be familiar to you. I think they're excellent from your ad hoc committee, documents. It should remain largely agricultural. The township with community support, I think, is an interesting parentheses, do its best to preserve these buildings. And without a purpose, these buildings won't be viable or sustainable. I'm adding 2 to that. Any proposals for the reuse or preservation of these buildings should be based on a holistic analysis and best planning practices. That's why our team is with you tonight. We're looking at site, economics, history, ecology, the buildings themselves, and agency refers to the concept of who operates, who's responsible for repairs and details and that kind of thing. So we think this is critical. It's a principle that decisions should be based on that. And at the last point is kind of what I call the tough love point, which is our charge is not to just tell you guys, this is wonderful, your ideas are perfect, everything's great, write a report that like isn't going to necessarily fly. And so based on point D, I'm suggesting that as in professionals with no horse in this race, we present what we believe to be true. So I'm coming at this, what I think are facts, gathering them, trying to reach conclusions that we all agree with, and base our conclusions and recommendations on that. So those are the 5 guiding principles. And then I thought oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we should pause at each one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, can I make a comment on your point E that
Yes.
You ended up with that we're going to present what we believe to be true. I think that's obviously why you're chosen, and your background is going to be important. But I would ask that the truth be supported by other examples, documentation, information about why you believe these things to be true.
100%, Steve.
Okay.
I'm happy. I've had a chance to meet you a couple of times out there and talk, and I think you and I are on the same page on that. And I think what this group will learn and the public will learn, our process, you're not seeing everything tonight, but it'll be, I believe we're going to base it on talking to you all, the facts, your perceptions and desires. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we keep going on here. So I'm going to say some things that maybe might seem a little bit, I don't know what the word is, harsh isn't the word, but prior efforts to solve the Patterson Farm puzzle, as I call it, it's a pretty good puzzle, have failed because I believe the wrong or too narrow of an approach was taken. An example would be, an engineer early on got into the Satterthwaite house in great detail. Maybe that was needed because you did some repairs right after that, but it's not going to be solved by only looking at 1 or 2 aspects. It has to be solved by looking at them all. And so that's what I mean by too narrow. Number 2 is just a statement of fact. The township took possession in the 90s. Not everyone necessarily sees it, but considerable improvements have been made. Roofs, emergency repairs, the houses that are occupied have been maintained and had services put into them. And there have been many studies prepared, none of which are as broad as the team that you have working on it now. It's just, number 2 is a statement of fact in my mind. I think 3 is a little bit different than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, is that there's an urgency to act now. I think people sense it. The buildings need attention. But it's not just that they need attention and you could say, well, why didn't they get attention? It's because a plan is needed before committing more public money to their preservation. We're at a critical inflection point. And I think we all know it. I sense it. I believe most people I've spoken to do too. So I like to sort of say that's getting close to a fact. And all of you are here tonight because Patterson Farm is a remarkable place. It's poetic. It's beautiful. The fact that you have it preserved is fantastic. And that, it's really your community, not just the township, but your whole community made us all be here tonight to do this process. And I commend you for it. And then reaching a consensus-based outcome, meaning all the stakeholders generally agree with where we're going to be going with this at the end. And I don't know where that is yet. I'm laying out a process, though, this consensus-based outcome, it's essential for success because we can't have outliers who didn't feel they were engaged sniping it at what we come up with here. We don't have the time, and it'll wear it down because this isn't going to be an easy task. So also a multifaceted analysis with planning, economics, history, structure, governance, all are difficult to weave together. And I think it's going to be a somewhat challenging task, but I think with the right process and with the right assumptions and agreement on our principles and assumptions, we can get there. So that's maybe enough lecturing for, I'm going to pause and then I'm going to come back to referring to those previous few statements. This next section are, ooh, what the heck's that? It's an interesting slide. I wonder what that was. I wanted to just share with maybe some of the public who hadn't seen it, and for you all to give you an update of where we are in our sort of task 1 deliverables, which are going to serve all the way through, not just for us, but for future planners, engineers, architects, and you all as operators of these buildings, is we did a 3D survey of all buildings. This is called a Matterport file. It happens to be the Satterthwaite complex looking straight down. The buildings are 3-dimensional accurate models that we then drew a 3D BIM model around it to get accuracy in our heights and proportions and all that kind of stuff. From those, we've cataloged and drawn every building now. There's 15 buildings. This is the Patterson farmstead, starting with the well house over to the main barn. These are these little data tables that I showed Dennis and a couple folks in a sort of a working session last week, where it's going to be square footage, circuit dates. As this grows during a process, it'll be possible uses, things like that. Similar for the Satterthwaite farmstead. And then each house is drawn to this level. It happens to be the first floor of the Janey house. Those are its drawings. We have a structural engineer who I've worked with for many years, very experienced, Charles Timby. He's written a draft report. He's finishing up tomorrow and next week. This will soon no longer be draft. All these documents will be available. We'll work out with Jim perhaps on how we get them available to the public. But these set the basis for structural capacity, what repairs need to be done to meet certain uses. And then that's the foundation for what's it cost to do these things. That happens to be, just a couple slides from his excerpt. The next section is where I'm taking our principles and early observations, I call them, and start to speculate a little bit, to start to draw bundles, put these things in bundles that we can understand. And it's what I mean by perhaps it was the wrong focus in earlier efforts, but I think part of it also was there wasn't the sense of urgency we have today. We didn't have the diversity of team or the commitment, perhaps. Maybe the community's always been committed, but you seem committed now, and I applaud you for it. But let me just share, there's maybe 7 or 8 of these things here. And some of these thoughts might catch you off guard, but let's just talk through them and then I'll open it up for comments. Is that I'm looking at this property as having 4 primary use areas, we're calling them. It's the farm operations, which we know where that is, essentially the easement area. It's art focused, which is essentially somewhat building on the AOI successes over at Janey House and the way they use the grounds there, but also from Todd's analysis, which he'll talk about. Farm heritage focused, generally considering it around the Satterthwaite buildings. Either of these could be on either side, or they could even commingle between them. But forgetting uses and forgetting individual buildings, these are broad categories that we can blur edges as this group wants to accomplish success, which we'll talk about as we go on. And then the one that's kind of the one that you might think is a little different. And this was an aha moment that came from talking with Charlie Timby, the structural engineer, is the Satterthwaite house is a little bit different. And I'll talk about the buildings in a sec, but it's a little separated from its outbuildings, not by much, but there's a slight separation. It's on a road, which makes it a little bit distinct, and its size and the type of building it is. So without dwelling on it too much, 4 types of uses. Then the next big point is every building should be looked at individually. Sure, we got 4 category areas. I got different types of buildings, but in preservation, my experience dealing with HARBs, being a HARB member for 20 years, dealing with historic buildings for as long as I have, is you don't, one size fit all answers don't fit. Every building is a different size, a different character, a different capacity, and can serve different functions. They have different needs. And so I'm saying we look at each building individually in terms of use, preservation standard, and philosophy. Then any building anywhere in these areas, in my opinion, could be occupied by an individual, an organization, a business, or a combination, meaning take the Satterthwaite farmstead buildings. You could have a craftsperson in the well garage, and you could have a 501c3 operating out of the barn. You could have somebody else across the street in the corn crib, and they could all be part of a community, part of this focus area. And this again came from looking at prototypes, but the one that came to mind was the Edison and Foreign Winter Estates in Fort Myers, Florida. Again, Charlie Timby happened to work on it. And he was saying, you know, down there, they all have an identity. Every building looks different. One has a florist in it. One has a blacksmith in it. One's their gift shop. You know, they're operated by individuals. Some are operated by the 501c3. But the point here for success is to fill buildings and use them, or mothball them if they're just needed for visual poetic impact in the landscape, or decide what we're going to do with them if we don't have a use such as that. And then the next sort of final point here in this category is there's three classes of buildings. There's two large houses plus the caretaker's houses. It's a residential angle. You got two large barns, which have different uses for assembly, for having large capacities. They could be 3 seasons, 4 seasons. I don't think you need both. You don't need both barns to be 4 seasons, for instance. And then there's various other accessory buildings. I'm not going to read this. It'll be in this document that I noticed last month was put online at the township building, but it talks about the characteristic of houses versus farm buildings, and that's sort of the basis of that slide. Just continuing going with observable facts. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, just a pause, back up one on the
Sure.
four primary uses. I get that. What talk to the nature, environmental, passive recreational kinds of potential uses that could be on this property.
Oh, absolutely.
Does that kind of overlap all 4 of these? Is it, do we see these just in terms of buildings? I'm just wondering where that use.
Yeah. Let me
reside.
Let me say 2 things. Sorry, I didn't pause and ask for questions. But the second thing is Bill Collins, who can't make it on tonight's call, put it well when he said there's 4 use areas, 4 focused functions, but the site also has features that cross areas. The stream is one example. A trail would be another. Another one might be the road circulation. So the forests, perhaps. I think trails are very, very important use for this site. The final plan, we have some suggestions on that. It does relate possibly to the easements. We haven't researched the easements enough to say whether they might not allow a perimeter trail, or if we have to swap easement land to achieve that. But I do believe that while all this is going on, the way this is going, my definition of success, every building has things going on. The whole place is a destination. Individual buildings are destinations, and they all enhance sort of the Edgewood, it's Edgewood Village, correct? Sort of community and trails in general. So the idea is to sort of make this the dream that you all dreamt about in the 1995 or whenever it was the township bought it, but haven't quite known how to do it. And so maybe that's too many words, Dennis, but trails and passive recreation are very much part of it.
Okay.
Which could include, to come to a point that Steve Hines made when we were on site, is where's remote parking? Where's a trailhead for people that want to use a trail but don't want to commit to coming all the way in? We'll talk about that.
Hey, real quick, you separate Satterthwaite from its farm buildings, but you don't separate the Patterson farmhouse from its farm buildings. Why is that?
Some of it was geography, Joe. And there's two parts to this. It could be that the ultimate use doesn't physically and how it's operated, how it's perceived as separate from Satterthwaite's outbuildings. You know, I think that the perception has always been, including mine, well, we got the Satterthwaite farmstead, you got the house and the outbuildings, they have to be together. And it dawned on me that, well, A, none of these things really have to be together except they're clusters. I think the Janney is so integrated with the Patterson farmstead, and the way that creates a kind of a community green. It's more of an identified space than perhaps Satterthwaite has. What Satterthwaite had that Bill Collins pointed out, it's the view sheds, he calls it. So when you're at Satterthwaite, that view across to Patterson, you know, that's more in your mind than the view from Patterson back. And it's partially, I think, because of how it sits in the land. But partially, the short answer is it's physically more separate. It's by the road, which is a unique characteristic. It's the only one that really has that close adjacency. And I think Janney House is so integral to the Patterson cluster.
Doug, can I ask you one question on this? If this is our vision for the 4 primary use areas, do you have any best practices from other sites as to how long it takes to realize your vision? In other words, to have the arts focused, to have the farm heritage focused. You know, how many years out are we looking to make this really happen?
Yeah. Todd, I might let you jump in here if you don't mind, and then I'll say something, but let's give you a chance.
Yeah, I was going to say part of that answer is the economics of how this works, right? And part of this is going to be, when I get to the second phase of my assignment, is looking at ownership and management opportunities or options, because that's going to determine how quickly over time this all melds together. I can say this, it's not going to happen overnight. And there probably be some tweaks along the way to make sure you get it right. I mean, some of the case studies that we've developed that will be part of our market study, you know, these are locations, you know, in the region that have developed synergies with arts and heritage and complementary activities that didn't occur in a 1 to 3 year period. They evolved over time. So I would say, to be realistic, whatever we ultimately end up proposing at the end of this study, I think we take the long view and think of it in terms of 5-year increments. You know, where are we in 5 years? Where are we in 10 years, right? So as opposed to getting everybody's expectations up, like, oh, in 3 years, we were supposed to have everything working. Well, that's not reality.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good point. I do think that it could move, some portions could move faster than others. And, you know, for instance, the farm heritage aspect, I asked stakeholders if there is a farm-related collection. I worked on the Trolley Museum at Steamtown National Park in Scranton, and that whole thing came about because there was a collection looking for a home, and it came through the Lackawanna County Tourism and the National Park Service and a group of intrepid volunteers, and the architecture and the governance and the funding all was driven by a collection which grew. It started out kind of crude and low key, but I think the purpose of this whole plan, if I come back to almost, it would have been the first page, we were hired to look at buildings, and our team came back and said, to understand buildings, you got to understand the land, the community, and the economics. And I think that's, I distracted myself. Sorry, I got off on a tangent, Rod. But any other questions on this slide, or should we?
You bring up a point, if I may, just so we don't lose it, because Helen mentioned to me the other day, and I'm not sure if it didn't click then, but it certainly did now, that there are 2 large collections of farm implements, and even some that have to do more with horse-drawn equipment. One is across the street at the other farm that's currently being evaluated for
Goldberg?
development. Yeah. And the other one is at Doylestown in the Mercer Museum that they do not have displayed in the museum because it's just too big. So if you can make a note of them, anybody who's interested.
So the way it works with collections, what curators tell me is you start with any collection and you just improve it. So you have a collection on day one and it just gets better. But let me keep going if you don't mind, because I want to give Todd time tonight and I want to respect your time. So I just want to keep going on observed facts. I think there have been several successes at Patterson Farms. One, the land's been preserved, the easement's been created, the agricultural operation's ongoing. You all are engaged. It's quite an engagement. I applaud you on it. AOI is there doing their thing. They use the Janey House very well. They use the grounds well. The buildings aren't, they're tiptoeing around the buildings, but still that's a success story. And the buildings have been kept standing, repairs have been made, emergency repairs, you know, but I don't think that's something that should be forgotten. These are all successes. And you've had some pretty good failures, which are still our problem, is that we haven't figured out how to go forward. And I think it's lack, and vision sounds like you don't have a vision, bad you. It's really, no, you haven't had the tools put in front of you to think that if you act on something, you're not doing it in a half-baked way. The purpose of this, and I'm so happy that you let us put together such a comprehensive group of people, is to holistically look at as much as we possibly can, talk to you all as much as possible to get your thoughts and dreams, and we're together going to create a vision of how you're going to go forward. But not having it causes deferred maintenance because you don't know what to do, and it's killing your buildings. So 6 is just the observation that this isn't going to be easy finding appropriate compatible uses. Some of it will be very easy. Some might be hard because it's hard to entice people to come. Some might be hard because it's hard to raise the money. And some might be hard. It's hard to figure out what to do with this thing until somebody comes along and says, we want to do this. What do you think? And then if frameworks are set up so that if somebody comes along and says that, you have covenants, you have easements, you have zoning, you know, in place, you can say, bring it on. We're ready for you. That's a good thing. That's sort of my goal. But let me just go through these. Non-consensus driven framework or less than rigorous is going to fail, my opinion. Rigorous means looking at all the things, no stone unturned. And I think we're all trying to do that together. I think for these buildings, if we don't find a use or have a use identified so that the township can justify properly mothballing them, meaning get rid of groundhogs, get things plumb and square, plug those last leaks, it's going to eventually, in pretty short amount of time, be the same as demolishing the buildings. At some point, they become attractive nuisances, and yeah, or almost most governments feel obligated to tear them down. And then I think 3 things are going to be required, and there's probably more, but we have to start by looking at these buildings in detail and understanding them. We're pretty close to that point. Study their relationship to the landscape, which Bill's doing, and to the community, which you're doing. And then finally, the relationship between future uses have to deal with the economic realities of the region, which is really what Todd's all about. So if you take these points, there's an exhibit here. This is my last slide, and then Todd will maybe pause for some discussion, and I'd like to shift gears for Todd to give you an update on his work. But these show the 4 zones: the agriculture, active farming, arts focus, essentially Patterson. You can see we're splitting along the feature of the water course, farm heritage, and the idea that, you know, you can see the distance between the well garage and the house is that, and there's issues with all of these, and I'll talk about them in a sec. The idea of this house could just be alone and that's it. It could have a little bit of land, it could have a bigger bit of land, but the concept is allow yourself to think in terms of maybe something else happens here. Or if something comes along that lets it be all of those, what's the problem? It could be, if the arts community is such a destination, they could share workshops back and forth. Maybe it's cool to have some tractors sitting over here of some heritage implements. Flexible with boundaries is kind of what I'm suggesting. For this to happen, we want to get the compost. So this is just our dreams as consultants. We want to get the industrial operation of the compost and gravel pit, not the, crushed blacktop gravel out of this area, and come off of Stony Hill Road. That easement, I know the road was removed. I know the easement's been erased, but perhaps it could be negotiated back. Bring compost operations over here. We've studied the use of the farmer. What if the farmer took the upper level of the Patterson barn? What if he used the packing house and this little shed over here for some of his equipment or operations or what have you? After much discussion with the consultant team and some with you all, we think that they're better served. As Dennis says, it's not a farm, it's farming operations. And Dennis, maybe I'll let you wax on that topic a little bit more, but if equipment is needed to be parked here temporarily in a pole barn or something, we think that kind of stuff happens here. This is a loop trail that could have remote parking with a trailhead. It could have a link to Edgewood Village. It could have links to other streets. It could possibly be used as a way to eliminate a sidewalk, needing to put a sidewalk along this side of Mirror Lake, which is tight. And we think if this happens and you have a discussion with the Bucks County Conservation easement folks, you need to give land back. And we're thinking that this hatched area, you see where my cursor is, that square footage takes back this land, which is currently easement, and puts it into your camp because it's more useful to you than the farmer, I think. This is more useful to the farmer than it is to you. And it allows this to happen and leaves 6 acres or so of land available for a little bit of trail encroachment into the farming operations. And that's kind of where we are. And I think I'll pause, leave this up and open it up a bit and maybe get some feedback tonight before we go on to Todd.
I'll say I'd like getting the industrial leaf mulching things out of the center of this, all these activities. That certainly makes sense. And that area over where the greenhouse used to be is really not farmable now, since it's been compact down with concrete buildings and things. So that, as Sam said, it'll take 30 or 40 years before he could plant anything there. So getting that kind of industrial operation out of there makes perfect sense to me. And certainly the farming that's going on is going on beyond the easement. And you're right that what you've defined there as potentially land that would go back in or would become part of the ag easement makes sense, because that's its best use. Conceptually, this makes sense to me.
There's one other thing to add that I should have said. These dotted lines, Bill began with the circulation. So this dotted line here is the farmer's path. We want to keep farming equipment and farming operations from crossing these destination centers. So the farmers outbound of that along his fields keep this road, comes over here to Stony Hill. It's perfectly logical for him. These little blue dots are gates so that for emergency vehicles and all, things could still connect if need be. We're visualizing this zone, the Janney house, whether it's tight around it or this little large, depends on what kind of takers come along, uses the existing driveway. This is its entrance, but this use has its own entrance that's on the other side of the stone wall that's in front of Satterwaith, comes up along here for its close parking and its remote parking when there's an event. So one of the other aha moments, to come back to Joe's question, why and where did the separation come from? It was the idea that you could have two entrances. This one stops, does not cross the view shed. We don't like cars and trucks driving through the view shed. Bill wants to bring this landscape right up to these buildings. So if you have an event in the lower level of the Satterthwaite barn, it opens out to a tent and a festival, you know, a craft show or whatever. And so their parking is on the backside. These people come in, park, one and done. This is all pristine. That's kind of the vision, and circulation had a lot to do with it, Dennis.
Okay, okay.
So that's the end of my presentation.
I'd like to offer congratulations. It's a great beginning point with a lot of evaluation and thought process already gone into it. So, you know, from another professional, kudos.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Steve. Next month, at the end of that, we really will know where we are. Once we sort of talk through with Bob Powers and Charlie Timby, the preservation strategy benefits of different approaches. We have some ideas on that I'm just not even going to breach tonight because it's too much. Any other comments or questions before we let Todd share his screen?
I just have one about the trail loop. How close would that get to the farming, the actual active farming, just from a safety perspective?
Well, I think along the edge, but so for what it's worth, I should bring a picture at the next meeting. I live near the Norristown Farm Park, which is fantastic. And when you walk on the trails, which in their case, they're paved wide enough for their park vehicles to drive on it, but you walk on them, they're accessible. And then they have maybe literally 8 feet of mown grass, you know, and then literally is where the soy or the corn crop is. And what's exciting about walking on those trails is watching the corn grow all summer. So you kind of want it close. I think it's a little grass buffer and just common sense. I mean, rarely am I aware of that people go running across the fields. You know, it is a concern, I guess, but we could perhaps maybe could do it for you, but if someone on the township end could double check it, if you're curious, speak with Montgomery County Parks about that issue, because the farm park's been doing it since the 70s. And it's 600 and some acres of farmed land. Okay, Dennis.
Let's go on to Todd. Let's get some conversations on economics.
All right.
Near and dear to my heart.
Thank you, Dennis. Doug, thank you. Doug, can you stop sharing so I can go ahead and
Oh, yeah. How do I do that? I guess it's new share.
There we go. Let's see. Should give me an opportunity, I hope. Let's see. Yeah.
Am I going at least?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to put it in slide share mode. All right. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Poole. Company is Forward Planning. We are land use economists, and we perform economic and real estate analysis for public and private sector clients. We do a lot in the realm of redevelopment and, you know, looking at, you know, brick and mortar products before they happen in terms of analyzing them. But we also have a practice area that focuses on the economics of open space, revenue generation, and doing projects like these where we're working in a collaborative effort with landscape architects, engineers, and so forth. These are the services that we provide. So just giving an understanding of who we are as a firm. And we've done a lot of work, you know, locally, regionally, and we work throughout the Eastern and Midwestern US. This is the project team, which I'm leading. We're all, you know, very well experienced. I've been in this field for about 30 years, 12 of it in the public sector, and the rest as a consultant. So our charge on this team, principally, we were brought in, as Doug said, to identify, the market potential, and that means identifying the profile of the market and examining it from both a local and a regional perspective, looking at socioeconomics, being, demographics, consumer expenditures, that kind of thing. Because, until we understand the market, it's difficult to propose a program, or certainly look at adaptive reuses and make it work. We are obviously going to be considering market viable adaptive reuses. I mean, there's certainly, I know there've been a lot of ideas that have been floated over the years. We've certainly heard some of those ideas during our interviews and discussions with local folks. But at the end of the day, whatever adaptive reuses are selected, they need to be market viable. And that, let me say this, market viable does not mean they are financially feasible or economically feasible. It just means that there's a market for that use. The next step, which is really going to come in our second phase, is to identify among those market viable uses, how financially feasible are they, or how can we make them so if they're not, through a variety of means. So we'll be looking at that later. We also, we're looking at identifying revenue generating potential, whether that's privately generated revenue, such as a separate third party private entity coming in and purchasing property and operating it consistent with the goals and objectives of the township, or whether third party funding, such as public funding or philanthropic funding, is necessary to underwrite the operations and capital expenses. We're going to take a look at that. And then one of the final things we will be doing is, after we've identified economic and revenue opportunities, is identifying ownership and management options for these adaptive reuses. And we're very much aware that the township is not all that interested in continuing to manage the properties on the farmstead. We're very much aware of that, and so that will be front and center when we're evaluating ownership management options. What are our methods that we utilize? Well, we definitely utilize a lot of public and third-party data that we've typically used over the years. Public data certainly could be U.S. Census data. It could be information that's available on the web for, competitive supply, or what we refer to as competitive supply. So other farmsteads that might have arts organizations or programming, or heritage centers. We consider that competitive inventory that we can find online. And we also use private third-party data as well, such as the socioeconomics trend analysis that we performed. We subscribe to a online application called Esri, which is one of the leading purveyors of socioeconomic data nationally. And so we've been using them for years, and that's what we've used to identify the demographics for this study. We've reviewed background information provided by the township, which is very helpful, and has certainly helped to guide us in a proper direction for this study. We've been interviewing industry professionals, and folks who are running, heritage organizations or arts facilities that are similar, or overseeing, programming that might have application on your farmstead. So these are all important interviews. We've also sat down with, folks that are, currently using the farmsteads, such as, folks at AOI and the existing or the current farmers. And, I know Colleen, I think, is on here as well. We've talked with her briefly in her facility, which is very nice. So we think that's important that we get, on the ground information and insights that help guide our study. review of third-party research reports, and you'll see this when we provide our final market study. We have some case study reports that are in there. Some of it pulled from existing research. Some of it is, primary research that we've conducted and developed these case studies, which I think will offer insights into what you can do on these farmsteads. And then, of course, socioeconomic trend analysis, as I've mentioned, is kind of the basis for where we start and helps guide us. So on the screen right now, one of the first things that we like to do is start with study areas from which to pull data, from which to examine competitive inventory, other sites that might compete with the Patterson farmstead site. And so we have on this map, a Lower Makefield Township is identified in the center of the map here. We have a 15-minute primary market area, that's that PMA, and that's a drive time. So the software that we use allows us to identify drive times, which is really how you get to markets. Sometimes you might see market analysis that uses circles on a map, and those aren't necessarily realistic, because as we know that using a circle on a map that shows 5 miles or 10 miles doesn't tell you anything about how long it takes for a consumer or a worker or a customer to get from here to there. So this is why we use drive times. So what we're showing you on this map is from the farmsteads is what we've pulled. These drive times is a 15-minute PMA, a 30-minute SMA, which represents a secondary market area, and then for a larger comparison, a 60-minute SMA, 60-minute secondary market area, which would suggest potential customers or visitors who would come from a far distance, but obviously would come less often than somebody within a 30-minute or 15-minute primary market area. So these areas are the geographies from which we've pulled socioeconomic data, and in most respects, we've also identified competitive inventory. And this is just a closer look. This is actually tourism regions that we've pulled according to the Visit PA Bucks County. And so you can see where Lower Makefield Township sits within all this. We've also brought over our 15-minute PMA, 30-minute SMA, and then this is the greater kind of tourism region that we're showing you on this map, which includes much of the Delaware Valley regions, slides over across the Delaware to Mercer County. So you can see where our pull for prospective visitors, customers would come from. Very quickly, highlights key findings from our regional visitor profiles. You've got, coming into the Bucks Mercer two-county area, millions of visitors annually. And visitors to these two counties, if you break them up into the two counties, and according to Tourism Economics 2021 report, shows that there's roughly a relatively equal amount spent by these tourists. $872 million in 2021 spent in Mercer County, while in Bucks County, approximately $842 million was spent on tourism-related goods and services. And notwithstanding the pandemic, these spending patterns are predicted to grow, and obviously that's favorable for the farmsteads. According to research data, visitors in this region are drawn to galleries, historic sites, restaurants, and festivals. And it stands to reason, because, as I will also show you, that both the household incomes and the educational attainment levels are strongly correlated with the proclivity to visit galleries, historic sites, restaurants, and so forth. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You know that obviously Lower Makefield Township is is relatively affluent, and certainly the region is as well. And so that all bodes favorably for, I think, the types of uses and activities that have been expressed for the farm site. Farm Heritage Center, the arts program, obviously it's already established there, and other things that we are examining currently and still require additional evaluation. On the socioeconomic analysis side, again, just very high level key findings. Once you get this market study, we will have be chock full of detail, trust me. But coming out of this key findings, what we want to be able to do is target baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, right? And it's kind of covers everybody. And what's interesting here is as you move away from Lower Makefield Township, you get younger. So Lower Makefield Township represents the largest share of boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964. And as you get, within that 15-minute drive time that we showed you, that's where you have a lot more millennials. And as you get further out into the region, and now you're really getting close to Philadelphia, is when you get to millennials, a slightly younger generation. So you really, the primary and the secondary market areas are capturing a nice cross section of older generation and younger generation, which means the programming and the offerings at the farmstead or the farmsteads will need to keep in mind that they have this particular consumer audience available to them. And it's just a question of, how we want to balance that, or do we want to target a particular, generation. As you might expect, again, high discretionary household spending that goes hand in hand with high household incomes. We're showing you here, and we're able to pinpoint on Lower Makefield Township our data applications, based on consumer expenditure surveys produced by the Census Bureau, allow us to identify spending on recreation, lodging, food and beverages, and while traveling. So relatively high expenditure levels locally. They drop off a little bit as you move away. Again, that's to be expected as you get younger and lower household incomes. But nonetheless, the household incomes as well as the discretionary spending in your region, or certainly in the primary and secondary market areas, are relatively high, certainly relative to the nation and probably to other states nearby. And then finally, what we've also identified, and again, I think this is consistent with or correlates with the the income and the educational attainment levels, is that a large swath of the population, certainly the adult population, participate in outdoor, activities, nature related activities. That could be everything from hiking and birding to, running and cycling. They're interested in culture, going to museums, seeing, heritage, farm, type things, and certainly participating in arts activities in the region. So again, all of this being very favorable for the Patterson farmstead. Before I get into non-market viable uses, any questions on what I've shown you thus far? All right, hearing none, I'll keep going. We are, again, kind of in the midst of doing this analysis. And I think one of the first things we wanted to do was eliminate what we felt are likely not market viable. And when I say not market viable, that is to say they are not likely to be sustained over, some period of time, 2, 3, 5 years. simply because there would not be enough visitation for it, enough consumer expenditure for it, or that the facilities available to house these operations are ill-fitting or just inappropriate in the space offering. So, for example, I know restaurant use was cited as an opportunity, and if it was going to go anywhere, it'd probably have to be the Satterthwaite House. And the issue with the Satterthwaite House is, well, first of all, obviously, it would need a lot of capital expenditure to make it into a restaurant. But even still, even if you kept the footprint and you dropped $800,000 to $1 million, which is probably what it would take, the square footage is quite limiting based on the needs of a restaurant. Even if after it was all fit out, this would be the kind of restaurant where you probably could sit at best 20 to 30 people. So it would need to be quite high end to make money. And that's based on the existing square footage. You'd probably have to bump out in the back to make way for a modern restaurant kitchen. And when all said and done, the cost of doing something like this would probably be a non-starter for most entrepreneurs or restaurateurs wanting to establish a restaurant. Residential. I know there's been discussion about the possibility of, again, in this case, Satterthwaite House being used for residential purposes. And I have here in parentheses unrelated to farming activities, because I want to make clear that the residential would not be associated with, for example, a worker or the farmer living in this house. This would be separate and apart from whatever farm activity would take place here. We've been made aware through information and reports provided to us that I guess a few years back, you had a professional who is expert in historic houses and particularly looking at them for purposes of residential use, examine Satterthwaite House. And here, I mean, what I have bulleted here are really, I think, reflective of the findings of that report, is that the location would be undesirable because of its proximity to Mirror Lake Road, Route 332. It's directly under the flight path related to the Mercer Trenton Airport. Obviously, I'm not sure a lot of people would care for that. And then obviously the magnitude of investment that would need to go into the house to make it habitable would be, might not be prohibitive depending on the individual, but probably would not be worth it given what they could possibly spend somewhere else on a historic structure in a better location. So for that reason, we've ruled it out. That is not to say someone could show up and say, you know what, I'm willing to dump whatever it takes into this house, but the likelihood of that happening is not high. For similar reasons, a bed and breakfast would probably not be marketable. Same issues. Matter of fact, I mean, bed and breakfast entrepreneurs, they're usually operating on a relatively tight budget to work. And so they too would quickly find, coming into Satterthwaite, dropping that kind of money, and also the space available would be limiting on the, revenue opportunity side. They'd probably find this just, not palatable. Then one of the other uses we found to be non-market viable, and this I can say because in my line of work, I do a lot of commercial office analysis for clients, and so I know this pretty well. First of all, the office market is quite soft right now, and even before the pandemic, it was soft in many areas, and principally because of remote work and technology and the ability for folks to work in pretty much anywhere they want, but also for the fact that when a business, and this would be for a small business, when they're looking to locate office space for their business, more often than not, they want to be in a location that offers them walkability to amenities such as cafes, restaurants, personal services, sometimes even transportation. And obviously none of those things are available at this site. So, that would be a major strike against the Satterthwaite House becoming a commercial office space. And like the other uses I've identified above, just the cost of renovations is just far too great, particularly for someone who's going to come in and lease space, because the fact of the matter is landlords will do so much on a building or an office space, and really the fit out is that cost is typically borne by the lessee. And given the cost of what it would take to bring it up to snuff, it's unlikely that a potential tenant would invest that kind of money in a property they did not own. Now, on the potential market viable uses side, we are still, involved in examining uses. I think we're making very good headway. But just to give you a flavor of what we are looking at that, we believe to be viable, and not to say that this is an exhaustive list, but I think this is kind of where we're narrowing in. And for this reason is, we want to make sure the uses that we're identifying are also, compatible with and complementary to existing activities and the character of the site. It's a farmstead, and there's also history to this site, and there's also a existing arts organization that's doing quite well and could do even better. So this list, I think, is reflective of that. And as I said, we are still evaluating these uses. We're making very good headway on all of them. You will see in our market report the kind of information and data that we've gathered and how it's being summarized for each one of these uses. I would also say, not on this list, but I certainly have heard tell of, it was about 10 years ago, where you had interest from an equine center, possibly taking space at the Satterthwaite farmstead. And we haven't looked at that, or we would certainly like to evaluate that more, but that is a possible use that we could see being complementary to the existing site. So just to keep that in mind. Next steps in our analysis. So obviously we want to finalize the market report, which we are close to doing. And then obviously that will be shared with the ad hoc committee first. And then I imagine they'll make that publicly available. We will discuss those findings certainly with the ad hoc committee, answer questions, and get further guidance. And then based on what we've identified as market viable uses, we will discuss with the ad hoc committee which ones they would like to see examined further for financial viability. Maybe all, maybe a portion of what we've identified as market viable. But that will be our next step, is to look at the type of revenue they can generate through private sector transactions, as well as what public funding or third-party funding might be required based on the nature of the activity or the particular use. So that's the performing of the revenue generation analysis. And then finally, we will wind up with identifying ownership and management models based on those uses that are both market receptive and financially viable. And again, we will keep in mind the fact that the township would very much like to not be in the business of managing buildings and overseeing maintenance and all of those things, and certainly not managing something that is not public sector related. And then we will, as a result of all of that, we will produce a report identifying those uses and the associated ownership and management options. So that is my report.
Thanks so much. Fred, I noticed your hand was up, and then I won't moderate, but I'll just point that out to Todd and then let you go from there.
Sorry, I couldn't see. I had the screen in my presentation in my face.
Todd, you mentioned the four options that you mentioned as non-market possibilities for specifically for Satterthwaite House.
Mhm.
Would those also apply to the other buildings on both farmsteads, or have you looked at those at that point yet?
Yeah, I would say the reason that we focused on the Satterthwaite House as it relates to those uses is obviously the Janney House is occupied, and it's successfully occupied by an arts organization. We also know that at least one of the other buildings is also occupied by an artist. And we're also looking at the other, the barn building and maybe, one of the other outbuildings there as opportunities to further expand on the arts programming, kind of keeping that all clustered. I mean, it's kind of a campus, if you will, right? And so keeping that clustered. So we didn't consider those other buildings. And quite honestly, those uses that I've just identified, the residence, the bed and breakfast, the office, restaurant, right? Those uses really couldn't, once you take the Janney House out of the mix, none of those uses really could work over there.
Thanks.
I guess you could make the point that a restaurant could work in a portion of one of the barns, but I think the issue is proximity to the road, and visibility, signage, ease of in and out.
And I would also say this: it would have to be highly specialized. Now, here's what I could tell you is, if you've been to, like, I used to go skiing up in Maine, and I forget which particular ski resort it was Killington or Mount Snow or whatever, but I know there's like a famous pizza, place up there that does brick oven, and it operates out of a barn, right? And they bring people from all over to go to it. So, that's a restaurant, and you go in and you are in a barn and you're sitting kind of family style, and, they call you up to get your pie that comes out of the brick oven, right? So yes, that's an opportunity, but that's not easily done everywhere.
Could I ask, maybe in terms of clarifying and making understanding simplified for your presentation, which this is pretty deep and somewhat overwhelming to me for a bit. I'd like to say that if you could do a quick expense benefit analysis that would be alongside it. Okay, here's the overall potential cost of renovation. Here's what could be achieved with the usage, and this is why we are saying it's non-viable. It's especially for the non-viable ones, which are quickly done because you probably can get cost analysis of renovations versus here's what the possible income might be. And that might work for all of the other presentations as well. One thing I might ask you to put among your considerations is the value of the use in terms of public access and public achievement, and maybe township goals for a specialized space that might not be otherwise fulfilled in the township. So kind of like a quasi or maybe a totally public use for a portion of the site. And finally, I would say in reaction to that last comment about the restaurants, in some of the things that were considered a small bistro or cafe or snack bar might be included and utilized by parts of the program that are in the building otherwise, similar to what happens at sports fields. And that kind of thing might be considered as a special case.
Yeah, I can speak to that directly because, again, I do that kind of modeling and analysis for a variety of clients. Such a business, which would really need to be a concession, would die not a slow death, but a quick death. There just simply would not be enough support even for the programming that's there for such a use. And you probably would be hard pressed to find an entrepreneur who would take that on for that very reason. And again, I study this stuff. I work with entrepreneurs, and in my public sector life, I would make loans to small businesses. So I have a pretty good handle on that. While it sounds like a good idea, there simply is just not enough consistent daily traffic to make something like that work. However, I will say this, what you could have there, and again, this might come out in once I get to the modeling, the pro forma modeling of this, is food trucks on event days. So for example, when you have big farm events, and this is why food trucks are great, right? They don't have to rely on foot traffic in a single place every day. They go to where the activity is, much like an ice cream truck goes down a street in a neighborhood, right? The food trucks can show up there on event day or be there for the weekend, right? And then go on to some other place and make money. That's an economically viable operation. Whereas if you had a stationary food vendor there, that would be a tough go.
And I think to Steve's point as well, when we say a viable use, it's not, that is separate from a financially profitable use. It could be a community use, a community good that the community or nonprofits support. It's not, there's the market viability that could be the people would support it and use it. It's still not making money. And then there's this financially feasible. That's another level. And I think with this property, the goal is to find a mix of those. So you have some financially viable, financially feasible operations to help pay for the maintenance, but you also have community good. Just it's a beautiful spot. There's enjoyment. There's a passive trail, etc. We need a mix of those. It's not all, it has to be profitable, nor is it all, oh yeah, it's just nice to look at and it's all free for the community. Exactly. We need a blend.
Right. And I think that's the beauty of our team, is that we're working kind of in concert together for that, the preservation of the open space and the public activities, along with the fact that you need to generate some revenue to help support some of these activities, and even some of the uses, adaptive reuses and activities. Some will help subsidize others, right? And I'll be able to flesh that out once I get to that portion of the study.
That's great. Thank you.
One other thought.
Other questions, issues for Todd? We covered quite a bit there, and a lot to chew on. Todd and Doug, your slides from tonight, you're sending them to Jim. Jim, you can see to it that they're posted on the Patterson Farm website for everyone's access. Is that how that would work? Just remind me.
I have them and they will be posted.
Thanks, Jim.
So, and we can all, look those over and come back with questions, comments, etc. Next, if we can, the next item, if we can move on. Any other questions or discussions? Okay. Ron Schmid runs the subcommittee on community outreach and engagement. So Ron, I'm going to ask you to give a give a report on your subcommittee, and amongst that will be, we need to pick a date for this first public, in-person public forum. That'll be part of this conversation. So go ahead, Ron.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. I can be pretty brief. Our subcommittee meets always before the ad hoc committee. We now have yard signs and banners, not a whole bunch, but we do have, thanks to Bet and Monica, we have yard signs and banners, and we're going to be putting them up at public places, including Patterson Farm. It's really to get the community involved in what we're doing, send them to the LMT website to learn more about what's going on. And we're going to be using them this weekend, quite frankly, this Saturday at a booth from 10 to 4 at Memorial Park. And the reason is there's this collaboration between Bet's group, AOI, and Parks and Recreation, Monica's group, to bring art to the park. And the exhibit is through a renowned artist, actually, Seward Johnson. So there'll be 20 vendors and music and food trucks. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a booth there from 10 until 4. And we're going to be talking to residents of Lower Makefield who come there and tell them about what we're doing and try and get them more interested in this. So far, Dennis is going to be staffing the booth from 10 until 1, and then I'm going to come on from 1 until 4. But we could use some partnership here. So we'd love to have someone accompany Dennis and someone accompany me a little later on. So think about it, and if you have time, please let me know if you can join us this weekend. Okay, it'll be fun. It'll be exciting. We've done some outreach to local businesses, McCaffrey's. They are going to give us 2 days. I'm talking to both Dennis and we'll be talking to Doug and his team as to when is the best time to have that booth at McCaffrey's. You know, is it at the second tranche or the third tranche that you heard Doug talk about earlier? What's the best timing for us to be at McCaffrey's educating LMT residents about options? That's kind of where I'm thinking that would be a key time to get the booth. Next is the support for public meetings. And this one's key, I think. The subcommittee is basically talking to the township regarding creating a buzz around these public meetings and perhaps contracting with an agency to help us raise awareness for the 3 public meetings that we've been that you heard Doug talk about earlier. So we're trying to put that together, but what's key for tonight is to really land on a date for this first public hearing. And I know several dates have been discussed. Dennis, do you have one particular one in mind?
Well, via email, it turns out, according to Monica, the 2 dates that are where the community center is available is June 26th and 27. And those 2 dates also, according to Doug, your team would be available.
I think 26 was a definite preferred. I think Todd and Bill both had a conflict for the 27th. So the 26,
Yeah.
So I didn't know how hard of a conflict it was, but yeah, it's pretty hard.
Okay.
I'll be in upstate New York on the 27th.
The 26th is really what we're hoping you all can accommodate to work with Monica's dates.
Great. So Monday, June 26th, the consulting team would be available. The community center is available. The vision is to invite people in. We would have stations, kind of picture an expertise in each corner. You want to talk about the historical status of the buildings. You want to talk about the land. It's one corner. You talk about the land use. It's another corner. You want to dig into some engineering on some buildings. It's another corner. And it's just a good forum for us to collect community input, as well as to share what we've learned and what the thinking is thus far to get reactions. And this is why the the yard signs and the banners and Ron's activities. We want to make people aware of what of the issues and of this development of a master plan, and hopefully get people to show up. Now, we all admit it's June, it's the end of school year, it's beginning of vacation time, but it is what it is. The calendar we can't necessarily change. So I would ask for the committee members, are you available on the 26th? Not that all 7 members have to be there, but the more the better.
What time?
June 26th. We haven't gotten that far. That's a good question. Jim or others who have done these in the past.
I think what Bill Collins' view on it is, Dennis, 6 o'clock seems to work with most communities, but not so early that, I don't know, can't be too early, but if it's too late, maybe certain folks don't have time to get kids in bed and all that stuff.
And that goes on from 6 to 8 or 6 to 9, so people can come and go.
Yeah,
and
a couple hours is usually enough. But
couple
something
hours.
like that.
6 to 8. Yeah. I can be available on the 26th. I know that. I see Bet's hand. I see Ron's, Fred's, John's. Great. Okay. Well, let's put a stake in the ground, because I know there's a lot of work that needs to be done ahead of this meeting, and if we're going to have this first one in June, it's time to.
Do you want a
Keep it
motion?
moving.
Other questions, comments, issues about?
Well, 6 o'clock seems a little early for people who just getting home from work.
Yeah, it could be any time, Fred. I'm just sharing what Bill said. For me,
Seems like it's going to be more like a drop-in session.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an open house. So if somebody
But if
wants to
you're-
come at 7,
Yeah.
If you're going to do a brief summary in the beginning, then some people would miss that.
How about
Yeah.
7? How about 7 to 9?
works for me.
that works for me too.
That way, it also gives those people who have to go home and I say
Yeah.
have to, go home, eat dinner, kiss their kids, and then run back out.
Right. Yeah, I'm good with it. I
Good.
You want to do it? Okay.
Do you need a
7
motion?
I still just want to be sure any other thoughts or
Okay.
ideas or 7 to 9 on the 26th of June at the Lower Makefield Community Center. And Doug, yourself and Todd and Bill and Bob are available, or who?
Possibly. I think Bob is available.
Okay.
It might be good for him to be there. We won't have had the focus ad hoc meeting, but so what,
Okay. Right. Okay, Jim, does that work for you and the township crew?
Yeah, if you've confirmed that with Monica, that is available, then we're good to go.
Okay. In that case, I'll propose we have our first in-person public forum on June 26th at 7 to 9 in the community center. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Second. All in favor? All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we have that. Let's get that in the minutes. We'll get that circulated. Ron, you have, I know, a tickler list of things to do.
Yes, I do.
Ahead of that. Good.
Get busy, Ron.
And Ron, were you done with your report then?
Yes, I am. Unless any of the committee members have anything else to add, Bet, Fred, or Jim, anything else to add? No, we're good. We're good then.
Okay, great. Before we open it up for public comment, any other business, any other topics, issues that anyone wants to bring up? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, let's go on to the public comment section of our meeting. Jonathan, is there are there people available for public comment?
There's no one online at this time.
Okay.
Ooh.
9:16. Okay. Well,
Hopefully we didn't wear him out.
I choose to interpret that Todd and Doug did such a clear and wonderful job
Yes.
I'm
in
thinking
their
the opposite.
presentation that they've answered questions and they've just satisfied everyone. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. But it is important that we get community involvement.
Yeah, and Dennis, if I just may add, for
Please.
those people who may have tuned into the meeting that they want to let people know what's going on, people can always go to our YouTube channel and watch a rerun of this meeting. So in case they weren't able to watch it tonight, you can spread the word to your friends out there that if they want to see what was discussed, they could go and watch the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I sincerely appreciate that. And I also sincerely believe that all these efforts are going to result in a very bright future for Patterson Farm. It's going to be a lot of moving pieces, and it might be like, watching sausage made at times, but I think that we can save these buildings and bring them into community use at the same time, and so that I find exciting.
Dennis,
Yes.
Jim also wanted to say that the signs have been started to be put around town. More will go out tomorrow, and then of course the ones on Saturday. But Jim meant to say that. He just
Okay. Great. And yeah, and this event, Arts in the Park, Saturday, going to show up. We'll see how interested people are. Try to answer their questions and talk to them about Patterson Farm, and increase the awareness and knowledge of the project. So that I think it's a great opportunity. I turn to our secretary, Bet. You have notes of action items, assignments.
Aside from what the consultants are continuing to do and develop, we have Jim Majewski's going to post the presentations on the township website. Ron is looking for help with the booth this Saturday. If you could help out, please contact him. And we decided on the public meeting on the 26th from 7 to 9.
And I would also note from Doug's timeline and schedule that that October 12th deadline seems like the right deadline, and let's all march to that. Some of the intermediate steps to get there, we might have to mark and move, but let's try not to go beyond that because of the budgeting issue, because we want to get this engaged. If we have a master plan that's approved, that's real momentum. I don't want to lose momentum by missing a budget year or something. Let's keep that momentum going. So I think that seems like our timeline.
Okay.
Okay.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Oh, there's a lot of seconds. All in favor? Say aye. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
This is
Thank you,
important
Doug, and
work.
everybody. Todd,
Thanks, Ben.
thank you.
We appreciate it.